You are listening to Key to the Bridge, brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services, where we will be sharing human stories, talking about community resources, mental health, and wellness. This is a podcast for everyone. Welcome. All right, everybody. Want to welcome us back to part 2 of Key to the Bridge for this episode of us talking about, like I said, we were going to talk about all the things. All the things that we've got going on and things that we're thinking about and what we want to do next. And what we were talking about was just getting to the real of some of the things that we mean by what we talk about going on in our communities. And we were talking about how there is like the challenges and the burdens and the consequences of some of the really challenging things that we're doing. And then there's also the piece around, at least in Sonoma County, where we're all from, getting more, I think, transparent and clear and direct about the history of what we really have going on here and like what we want to do with the community that is now here. And then the last thing I said, which we can get into also too as we move through here, is thinking about if we're going to talk about liberation, love, community, what do we think some of that is already happening? And, what do we think about too in terms of the care that we're providing our community? Because I do think that one of the ways of accessing liberation and love and community is you got to feel a certain, like some ways to be able to access those things. And if people can't get themselves to that place, then I think we're going to stay in a pretty dark place for a while if we don't think about how we want to get people there. And so I do think both of you, though, were speaking to something that I think is super important in some different ways, too, is around like the naming and the language and the really saying what we mean, right? And so, Rolanda, you were speaking about the piece around holding it in, like how we're supposed to behave and keep things in a certain way in certain spaces and the consequences of that. And Mishale, like you straight up, I don't think about it very often where we're from, but where we live is very much a straight up caste system. Like it's built exactly on that. And agriculture in Northern California gets a pass in a way that when I go to visit my family in Charleston, the South does not get a pass in a lot of ways in terms of the way we look at agricultural history and like what we do. So it's just like a really complex way of thinking about that. So my question, or what I want us to think about, is when we are wanting to start to think about different pieces that we want to discuss or name or put out there, what are some of the things that you think are priorities or things that we could maybe focus on in a little bit of a different way? Maybe if we're going to focus on something, what are some angles that we maybe want to take in having those conversations with our communities and how we serve our clients? No pressure.
I have some thoughts just because you and I were, we were asked to kind of talk to some clinicians and support providers the other day about what they asked for was how do you support folks through isms, right? Like, so when they're experiencing racism and discrimination in its many forms. And so thinking about just like my intersections of my identity, right? And the ways in which my identities hold oppression or advantage. And something that you said is like, to find spaces, to create spaces where people can fully feel seen and heard. I think that's the fundamental human piece of it that we can all do if we can get through some of our own stuff. It's about being together, right? And centering love, but it's also about acknowledging that we go through life differently. And I think that what I have seen be really important, particularly for my clients who have marginalized identities, sometimes they come in thinking like, we make up the gaps. When no one's talking about anything, then we fill in the gaps with stories. And so a lot of times those stories, especially in childhood, are there's something wrong with me. I'm not enough. And so the acknowledgement of the socio-ecological factors, right? That no, like you are perfect and deserve love by being just exactly who you are. And in this space, you will feel love. I love my clients. And I think that Western psychology tells us we're not allowed to, right? And so
you're definitely not allowed to love them in Western psychology. No,
and so just acknowledging even our systems of healing that are still steeped in the dominant variants of white supremacy, right? And so I think about, for myself, rest and joy are hard for me. Doing hard shit is like my baseline, right? But we need joy and healing. And a lot of times I actually find that when I'm in community, that I learn a lot from communities outside the one I grew up in, how to be more joyful. And I listened to this podcast, I forget his name, but he talks about like loving the people that he does resistance work with and wanting to just bake a cake with them, you know, like I just want to bake a cake. I want to have a dance party, and like finding joy in the community that we have when we show up authentically to care about each other. And also another one I try to hold on to is like the rest is resistance, which is so much a part of Black liberation. And learning from that myself, like that productivity culture that I'm addicted to, and trying to dismantle that in myself. Because I feel like a lot of my clients and just people that I love and me, like just exist in this world where who are we when we're having, is joy productive? Is rest productive? Is being in community productive? Fuck it. Like, it's what we need. It's our human need. And so call it what you want. But so I think there's ways, healing, you know, dancing together, being together, swaying together is so healing.
Oh, yes, we were swaying.
We
just
were
a little
swaying.
bit,
Yeah.
It's when you talk about it, it's like so right when we were on strike the last time, because we were always on strike, but the last time we were on strike, someone directed me to a podcast by Glennon Doyle, which I wasn't honestly familiar with her at all. Yeah. Right. But what it did was I became familiar with Tricia Hersey and the NAP ministry, which I knew nothing about. And, you know, I never was a really big book reader, so I never read really any Audre Lorde, but that whole, you know, what is it? Rest is an act of resistance. And Tricia said something in the podcast that I really resonated with me, because the whole time they were on strike, like I doggedly, determinedly, like I was like, I am not going to go back. And it was hard because you couldn't afford to not be working.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to work.
But it gave me a chance to do something that I normally would not allow myself to do, which was dream. I had like this, I would feel, and I didn't realize this until, and it's funny, like I'm 50, going to be 56, but anyway, I digress. Very soon. But it took me many, many years to realize, like, Rolanda, you never allowed yourself to dream, because I think I was always so inclined to believe if you dream, then there's the possibility that it'll go clunk.
Yeah,
so then
happen.
I did what a lot of my clients do, which is hold themselves back. Being on strike for so long, it allowed me to rest. Even though we were out in the hot damn sun, you know, getting stung by bees, you know, like all kinds of craziness was going on, and we were pounding the pavement. Still, it was restful, and we were in community.
You were.
We were completely in community, having conversations, dreaming, hopeful. And that was when I started to dream about this life, right? The life that my ancestors want me to have. And so when you talk about that whole rest, you know, like the way Tricia broke it down, you know, I didn't think about it, you know. It's like, this is a very much, you know, it's a white supremacist, like capitalist society. And some people are grinding so hard, we just don't take a break. You know, and everyone can grind, but then there's elements in our communities that grind even harder because we feel like we have so much more to prove, so much more to show. You know what I mean? It's like a constant, like, oh, I can't like half-ass it. I have to like full out. This is why Black women have issues with the superwoman complex, you know? That, you know, we have to do so much more than someone else. We have to hold on so much of the burden. We have to like keep a smile on our face. We can't like go to therapy. Like all these things that are to our detriment, you know. So I just, when you said that, it just like really resonated with me about that, you know, like rest and grind. And I think we need to do that. The resting has allowed me to dream, but it's also allowed me to be more effective. You know, because now I feel like I'm more effective for the people that I really love to work with. And you're right. You know, like it wasn't until like really kind of associating myself with more like BIPOC clinicians and hearing the way they do the work, I do the work very differently than I did before, because I think it was very much like, I'm the therapist, you're the client.
Right.
You know, and that's the way it has to be, like in systems like Kaiser and stuff like that. You can't. But I mean, I think back to one of my clients who I worked with, and the spouse had passed away, and I would not go to the funeral. It wasn't even a funeral; it was a memorial, and it was going to be like in an outdoor venue. And now, if that would happen, I would go.
You would go.
I would go. I wouldn't maybe be like associating and all that stuff. I kind of still put myself in the back, but I think back to that moment when I said no, and that person was fine. He didn't have a problem, but I wouldn't do that now. It's very different, you know?
I'm just thinking about, you guys are talking about being in community. You're talking about loving on each other. You're talking about dreaming. You're talking about showing up, right? Like, how do we show up? And the other piece that's challenging too is figuring out why we think we need permission. Like, there's a permission piece, right? There's people who tell us, like, where and when and how we can do those things, and if it's appropriate and not appropriate, and, like, who's in charge. And that part, I think, too, is sometimes we think we're not doing enough, or, like, if we want to be co-conspirators, or we want to be, move in resistance work, or have all this massive, grandiose change. And sometimes I'm like, I wish people would just do more of what they want. Like, don't, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to, you work for a massive medical company and there's a policy that you're not supposed to go to your client's funeral. Kiss it. I'm going to the funeral. You know, you want to show up and care for people in a way that's more authentic. Like, you should do that. And I think, like, that part around, like, why I joke about the strategic plan is, like, I wish there was just more sometimes simple doing. Like, it doesn't have to be massively grandiose. Like, we can't, like, change everything tomorrow. But I do think that need for permission and safety to even do, like, some of the smallest things that is really hard for people. Like, one of my favorite little examples is having two babies at the same time makes you kneel in a way, and being humble in a way that, like, you're forced. Like, there's absolutely no way as one person with two small babies, that you can't do it on your own. And so you just kneel. Like, I just remember being like, no, I'm just taking a knee, I'm going to help out, like, whatever. And people come to you. Like that, like, that's like having children has shown me the best, like, humanity of other people, because people come, they show up when they notice people need help, especially with children. My favorite, man, Trader Joe's on Santa Rosa Avenue. Those people, those folks, I love those folks. We go into that grocery store, they know my family, and they've helped hold babies, pushed my cart out for me. That once or twice that I actually had to leave the cart, because we had lost it. We had to go, but I think about sometimes, like, what you're talking about in terms of rest. Like, if part of resting would mean that other people in the community need to support you so that you can take the rest. And then how do we support you in that? And I think about how we as providers have to be very, very careful about how we do this work, because right now it's an act of resistance to take rest. Like, it is very hard. We're asked to do, especially folks who are doing the work in the way in the world we're doing the work. I could be doing 5,000 things every single day, being pulled in all of the directions, because it doesn't feel like there's enough people. Like, it just doesn't feel like there's enough people invited into the space to, like, do the things that we want to do. And so I wonder, for, like, the two of you, thinking about how you all are bringing in and caring for yourselves. I mean, you had to go on strike to get rest so you could dream. I'm hoping that's not going to be the case in the future for people. Like, that's how far it had to go. Like, that's not, to me, it's like, that's not good enough. Like, that's not. And that's not. And I want more of that for people.
But I think that what happens, and I've seen this with, like, friends and colleagues, it was interesting just with the strike. It ended, and then everything resumed, and then all those, like, healthy habits kind of fell by the wayside very quickly, because you're back to autopilot in survival mode, just getting the work done. It's like a grind, and so I find that with private practice, I have to hustle in a different way, but I do have moments where I can actually rest. I can plan my day in a way where, like yesterday I went and got a manicure, during the day, and then I saw clients after that, and that was that's a luxury that I didn't have before, but there's also a cost for that. Now I don't have security in other ways, but at the same time, it's like for longevity and for my, it's like I stopped saying, I used to say to clients all the time, like, what do you do for self-care? And they would just like look at me like, oh Lord, here's this therapist talking about self-care. So you know what I started doing? I started calling it self-preservation. And I said, that sounds a little dramatic. I said, but that's really what it's about. And when I started calling it that, then people like looked at me not in that same way. So what do I do for my own self-preservation? I have to remember that I have to model. Because for years, I didn't model what I was like, I would talk the talk, but I didn't walk the walk. And so now I model. So once I know and I want to learn more about Tricia Hersey's work, I had someone yesterday who was in an urgent situation, and we talked about dreaming during that talk. Or excuse me, it was a phone session. And I brought that up a lot with people, like making them know that it is okay to rest. It is imperative, it is vital that you do this. And so I try to do that for myself. Am I successful? 100? No. But I'm more successful now than I've probably ever been in my life.
Which is what you would need if we're going to continue to do any of the things that we're talking about doing. You can't be nearly as tired. Like not even close to as tired. And and where we live, what I notice the most is people who want desperately to give the upper middle class image of their life and what they have and what they're doing, and they're barely financially and physically surviving. And that piece around that is also not like unique to where we live, but it's something that I'm noticing more and more, is that like even if you are of a lower socioeconomic status, like you have to look and present yourself in a way that we don't look like that. Like I literally, I had somebody say who was coming here to visit, who is from the city, that we have like the nicest looking poor people. And that's like a really rough comment to say it like that, but that our city and our community has done a really good job at like keeping it looking like everything's fine here. And you know what? There's some realness to that. Because I grew up in Bennett and Rincon Valley, and people used to say poor people didn't live over there. And I'd be like, yeah, they do. You just don't know that they're there. Right? And, and like we live in a community that is very good at that, what it looks like, right? And the only time you hear of unhoused people is on the Joe Rajota Trail. And then we just like move them around. We have a way here of like really taking what we're doing and have it look like we're doing it. Like we're doing all the things. And I wonder sometimes about like the cost of that. Like what are we missing or not doing, right? So
well, part of surviving is that people have to mask their reality in order to be socially accepted. The cost seems huge. It seems so huge to me. And I think about being in community where you can't show up as yourself, right? I think about that in mental health fields, even like for us, right? Like, am I allowed to be credible as a clinician who also has a mental health disorder? Can I have really bad days and also be credible as someone who can help others, right? And so just the way, like, even what you're talking about, like that it looks like there's not a problem holds us back from seeing the problem, which is what I feel like is such a big issue in our communities, is like, we're just not talking about the problem. Like, we have to talk about it. Okay. So even the fact that we can't just say like, all right, let's talk about racism in our community, right? Let's also talk about, joy in our community and strengths of all different communities, right? Of BIPOC communities. Let's talk about all this, not just the struggle, but like, we're just not talking about it together, especially if the way that we're trying to show up, but that's also survival, right? That is survival a lot of times.
It's just I think lately I've noticed more than normal that there's a real push to have things not look like the problems are here, or that maybe some of the work is like done, or we're like, you know, we've done it. Things are really great, and I get needing a break. I'm not saying that. Sometimes you also need a little bit of a break. I get it. We can't be boohooing and being, you know, feeling terrible every second of every day, or you won't function. You also won't celebrate. But I think about the just not honoring what's all in the space. And that's a way that I've grown up here, is like this piece around, I'm going to go into spaces where it's going to look like I'm safe, but I'm not really. I'm not. And it's going to be secretive or passive aggressive or, you know, not even just aggression, but it's socially appropriate aggression. And so that it's okay. It's okay. And it's permitted. Or, if you look a certain way and can speak a certain way and have that privilege to be presented in a certain way, right? Like, I'm white enough for people, so I don't make people as uncomfortable. So there's some safety in that. But what is the cost of that, right? Because there are things that I am not feeling comfortable saying or doing because there's a risk. And our community is so drastically getting just so rich. Like, you know, like we've got so much cool is like an understatement, like powerful, different types of communities in our area. And I want there to be more safety in like showing up as we are. And it still feels a little,
and I think we have
touchy.
to, it seems to me like we have to call that out. I mean, it's directly a power hoarding, like a variant of capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. It is what it is. I mean, I think the whole idea of like, oh, make it look okay so we don't have to talk about it, is because if we acknowledge it, then we might be called to shift it, which means people are going to lose power, right? You think that like really people who have the wealth in this community, who are making the decisions in this community, want that to be exposed? Probably. Especially if communities are getting more united, right? If we are talking to each other and going, oh my gosh, our liberation is caught up in one another. That actually, when I think about the ancestors come, when you're talking about freedom dreaming and Robin Kelly and Jamila Dugan and folks like Audre Lorde and I think about like honorary ancestors. Dr. Dominguez always talks about honorary ancestors, like folks that I look to learn about liberation, right? And how much I can learn from Black liberation. And then when we're connected and we go, oh my gosh, we can dream together and our worlds, our liberation can be caught up in each other. That shit is powerful. Very. And people don't want that. No. Right? The three of us sitting here having this conversation, right? They want fragility to be at the center of this. And they also want the exclusion, right? That cancellation, that like, well, what if I say something wrong, right? What if, then are we going to never talk to Mishale again, right? They want all that fear to be here. When we sit here and love and going, what is good for you is also good for me. And I care about your family and you care about my family. Whew, that's scary. So let's just not talk about it. Let's just pretend everybody's okay. Right? But there is a power hoarding, right? That is typically male and white and wealthy and cisgender and heterosexual, that like has to be talked about, right? And
which
and
own
maybe
most
called
of the
in
industries in this community, which own most of the industries in this community in particular. Our major industries are owned by the folks you just described.
Well, and like, who was it there? I was just watching a video on a black-owned winery somewhere where I didn't actually like know a lot about wineries. It was like in Georgia or something. And then I looked it up, and there's not a black-owned winery that I could find in this community.
Well, yeah.
There is a guy, I believe.
I like how I looked to Rolanda, because probably Rolanda knows all the black people in Sonoma County.
I do know. Lord.
I did it. I just want to name it.
And I don't.
I'm like,
Rolanda probably knows more black people than me.
I really.
So maybe she'll know if
and
there's
all
a black
my friends
winery.
are white.
That-
So
Yeah,
I told you,
Maybe you know. I don't know. But
But I mean, just as a really quick aside, I believe there is a gentleman like Healdsburg Way that does some like sparklings, and like there's Napa, there's Brown Estate, and that's a black-owned winery. That's phenomenal. But there's not.
There's just not a lot. And I think about like how many Latina-owned wineries are there, right? Like I don't know.
There are. Like just recently I got, the Sonoma magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Every now and then they'll do, and there was one local that is owned by a Latino, I think it's a husband and wife, I believe. So, I mean, but the thing is that the narrative is not, there is a narrative that is constantly pushed, which is, and this is like all over this country, I'm sure, where like there's certain people don't, like, wine snobs, like people, like I remember that wine train debacle with the black women that from a number of years ago and whatever. It's like, we don't go to wineries. We're not, I mean, there's like this, we don't own them. BIPOC people don't own this. We don't make enough money to go or to enjoy. So there is this constant like pushing, and you're right, that separation keeping us. Because I've always thought this. I even think about like, and this is not depressing, it's reality. I always thought about this with jails. Like it's so segregated. But I used to always be like, but I don't understand why like brown folks and black folks don't kind of band together. Like I could never understand why there's all these pockets when like we're so much stronger together.
Yeah, but
than we
part
are.
of in the jail system though is also to deliberately keep them all fighting with each other so that they don't band together.
No, that's true.
That's true.
I mean, that comes
But
from
we do that in society.
We do that in society.
And
Let's all fight. So
and
then
my
we can't help each other.
understanding is that was designed based on poverty and slavery.
Yep.
Right. That like poor white folks might get together and fight for liberation with enslaved people, and so let's give them fake power where they get to have control but no land, no money, right? And so that idea that people push each other down so they don't have to be on bottom is like fundamental to our country, right? And so that separation was designed. And I think that part is what's hard is like we're fighting in the systems, whether it's education or the carceral system. They were designed for separation. They were designed not for us to heal. And so when it feels really hard, it's because it was designed that way. And not so much that I think there's like little people in the clouds like boop, 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 but I think that we do have to acknowledge, right? Like housing districts, voting districts, like those things have been designed to harm people and separate people and oppress people. And so part of the way that we care a lot about that is to be together, right? To be together, to love each other, and then to go, we should. I mean, when people talk about equity versus equality, like equality is the goal. We're just so far from it, right? We're so far from it. And part of it is having joy together.
That's real.
Part of it is allowing for rest and baking cakes together. So then we can also have the ability to go out and fight for each other's liberation. And I think about that in the school district that my kids go to. Last year, we were fighting for LGBTQ rights and trans rights, and we didn't have a lot of folks from outside that community show up. And this year, we're really fighting for Spanish-speaking rights. We don't have a lot of non-Spanish speaking people show up to those meetings, and it breaks my heart because in my head, it's like the same structural issues that are not prioritizing or centering these groups, and they would be so much stronger, but we don't see ourselves in each other. And that feels by design, even just where we live, right?
And I'm wondering too, like lately I've been thinking about, like, I don't even know, I mean, I grew up here. This is my hometown. And I do not know enough about the history of the way our county and community is set up. I do not. So I think about that a lot. Like, I don't know about how, if we're going to talk about agriculture, like, I don't know how our system, like, got set up here very much. I know family names. We have a lot of family heritage names in our county that have been here for a very long time, that are definitely the fundamental foundation of our economic system here. But I don't know I don't know the history of our policy development.
You mean post-colonialism, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, I'm thinking, like, I would even say post the 1904 earthquake, when Sonoma County really started to become a county and a town and a community, people leaving the city and moving north, and wanting to have land and have options and space and, like, all of the things that happened. And our community is unique in that way. Sonoma County is it's just odd in general, like the way it's set up, the way we've organized things. But we don't really name the history part of it. We don't name the socioeconomic segregation that we set up in this community so deliberately. It's so very clear how we set it up. And then we now have people who, not, I mean, little call in here, but we now have children who are the descendants of these families who are our age. And I'm like, I keep wondering too, like, how do I invite them into spaces? They have a lot of power in this town and this community, but they come from a different generational time. Are they welcome? I'd love to talk to them. Do they want to do something? Do they want to be invited in? Do they want to talk about what we could do? Because Sonoma County has a weird opportunity in terms of how much economic resources we have here and what we could be doing.
And I just have to say, Erica, that I would say, like, if we're going to talk about Sonoma County, that we really need to center talking about it before it was Sonoma County too, right?
Oh,
because
100%.
This
100%.
land, right, is of the Coast Miwok, Wapo, and Southern Pomo people. And there were vast economies here in existence before wine, right? Like, that was here. And then this, earlier you said, like, how did Spanish speaking people get here? And it's, like, interesting to think about, when do we start talking about
They were here
the
first.
inhabitants of this land? And they weren't speaking Spanish at that time?
When it was Mexico?
Right.
Yeah.
And they were here.
They were here. Oh, okay,
And then there were people here.
Good reminder.
And then people came to conquer it from Spain, right? So, just even, like, how far back
How do we
want
wanna
to
go? I don't
talk
know.
about this? Because I think that actually we could learn a lot if we talked about the economies that were here and the way that trade and interdependency, right, was a part of a way of being. I think there's a lot of indigenous wisdom that's here. The people are here, and if they were uplifted and brought into conversations, right, then we would all be better for it. And I think the thing that's the most confusing for me, and I'll just speak, when I'm in communities of white folks who are so scared of sharing power, of sharing who we center, my babies are so much better for who they get to become if they're in diverse groups. And the fear, to me, needs to be addressed. I think that there's white body trauma, like Resmanicum talks about, right, that's attached to that. Because otherwise, why the fuck do you not see that we are so much better and richer and more fun and more wise when we do things in community together, right? But there is this real fear that if we start talking about indigenous ways of living or, Black liberation or have a queer bingo game or whatever we're doing, right? That, like, there's just so much fear around what happens when we are human together. And that's where that power hoarding piece comes in, right? Like, that part we have to acknowledge. And it's not benefiting most of us.
No, it's not benefiting. Well, you're right.
That
most.
1%,
you're right.
right?
You're right. It does benefit some.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that'll make sure that it will never change, or they'll attempt to set it up. Yeah.
And I think sometimes it comes from me coming from this space of, like, I'm a clinician. I've done all of these things. I got all this training, and I'm like, we cannot, like, therapize our way out of what it is that we're talking about. We can't keep, like, diagnosing people and giving people medication and then sending them to therapy and you need to do more yoga and you need to take more vitamins and you need to eat better and you need to do whatever. And I'm like, no, I mean, those things are all great. I'm on board.
They are. They're good.
Things. I actually did all of those things in the last 48 hours.
Good for you.
Just to be clear, I was trying. I had to.
Good for you.
I had to like take a minute. But
I'm impressed.
Right, I'm not. All of those things are really great. And this piece around like that isn't going to assist in our community being at least what the three of us are dreaming about, right? Like in terms of a resource. Right, there's so many things that people could access to like love and care for themselves and their communities that are not outside of them. Like they don't necessarily need to go get into a system and seek it or pay for it or advocate for it. It exists in the communities that they're already in. But the fear around tapping into that and the knowing that you're like suppressing, you know it as a little person. Little kids, man. Little kids know. Okay? They know. One of the things that I rarely like about social media is the highlighting of children in like a lot of the things that get shared or reposted about like how kids do something. And I'm like, we used to know. Like we used to know.
And it's easy. My daughter, every time I see someone and I'm like, he or she just looks at me and goes, they, you don't know their gender. Like every time. She's 9. She's 9. It's just her way of being.
No.
It's just what and it wasn't hard for her. I didn't have to like undo any of that. You know, she just loves, we have lots of trans folks and queer folks and non-binary folks in our community, and she just loves them and is like, yeah, I want you to be happy and be yourself. Why would I? But then I think about a client that I used to have that I sat with that was misgendered constantly and grew up in a religion in which they were shamed for not meeting gender roles and the deep trauma there. And I could see them and hold space for them, right, deeply. And also, we would do breathing techniques and gratitude practice and trying to shift the internal dialogue and moving the body to get it out. And I couldn't make people not misgender them. Yeah. And that was so painful. And every single day they were reminded, just by the way people greeted them, that they weren't seen. And that's like, what do you do as a clinician? You know, how do you...
I know.
It's overwhelming sometimes.
It is.
That's what makes us tired. And that's
where the burnout comes out from.
Right.
Yeah. That's where the burnout comes from. And, you know, you were talking about this. It's like, I remember when I grew up, I mean, I grew up in Iowa, like a chunk of my life.
That could be a whole... I have so many questions.
Wait a minute, but
you said Iowa.
But let me just say this. I grew up in Iowa, and I had community. I didn't know about racism until I moved to California.
I've heard,
preach on that.
Tasha, who works here, talks about coming from England and like...
Yeah.
Now, what did she say? She's black before anything else. Like,
correct.
Right?
Oh yeah. But it was it's just, and when you were talking about like your, the whole, everything is all the he, that I still struggle with because I'm still like old school. Like someone was gay, they were straight, they were bisexual. You know, so that's the way it was. Things have evolved and changed. But I remember growing up and like nobody said anything. Like my one cousin who's now deceased. He was gay. He was gay from the day he popped out of the womb. You know, there was nothing that ever would have made you think that he wasn't. And everyone was just like, that's Curtis. Curtis is Curtis. No, like just embracing, accepting. It was really interesting, the community. My father's best friend was this white dude that lived next to us, and they would go hunting all the time. My good friend, best friend Julie, was a white girl. I would go down to her home and spend the night at her house. It was just very interesting. It's so different than what people think of what the Midwest could be, like maybe what it is now. And I'm thankful that I had that experience because that's what I bring to the community now. You know, I can meet and greet someone, even if I don't fully understand, I don't care. I'm just here to help you. You know, I'm here to help you be seen, to be heard, to help you heal, to help you recover, you know, because there's people, you know, they're dealing with so much and we don't take enough time to really empathize You know what I mean? Like, can it be learned? I don't know. There's always that debate. Can you learn empathy, or are you just born with it? But we don't really empathize. We don't try because we're so busy. Like you said, maybe it's power hoarding. There's always got to be an other. There's always got to be someone that is disenfranchised. There always has to be, like, I've got to be doing better than somebody. So we always have to put someone in that other spot, marginalize them, push them out, versus, like you said, coming together, like really coming together and just healing and recovering and building something. And this country could be great. It could be.
I mean, and I'm all right if we just start with Sonoma County. I mean, want to bar.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
you
sorry.
can. I mean,
I went too big.
No, Rolanda, don't. No, we can dream.
Don't let. Yeah.
You dream. You dream.
Dream.
You dream.
Yep.
You can totally dream. I think.
Dream with you.
And Rolanda, like, that's for real. Like, we have I think too, like the amount of goodness that is like just. Like here in our community, local community, and our country, like there's so much, and we're very centralized right now on fear, with a dollop of hate, and just stress around productivity and perfection and money, right? Like those things, and like I just want, at least here, we're talking about shifting the dreaming and the valuing and like what it looks like. And I brought it up. I'm like, we had this, like, thinking about how we like started this conversation is like this time of year, it's warm, we're privileged to live in this beautiful place. And so all of these things come up, and because I think the sun is out, we'd be feeling good. Like I said, fireworks, barbecue, little sunscreen, things going on. We have an opportunity sometimes, I wish, like this time of year, to hold both things at the same time. Like, how can I hold joy and celebration and excitement and connection to nature and, being in community? People come outside in the warm weather, and like being in community, like the amount of events. There's so many. May was popping this month, man. Sonoma County was not playing in the month of May. There were so many things going on.
A lot of good people born in May.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I mean, we were like ready. I felt like this May was like a real big deal. And then coming into June, there's like also like all of this amazing going on. And so we have this opportunity here too that I wish moving forward we could think about how we want to utilize it. Like in terms of our connections to the earth, and like what do we do when we have periods of time of light? Like literal, physical, spiritual connection of like light. Like, what do we want to do with it? Because it's a different time to like have conversations and ask questions and be wondering and being together, versus like February, not a different time. That's when we talk about being in the dark. And I'm okay with that. Like, that's what February is. But now
both are important. Right?
Both are super important. And so I just thinking about a little bit, like coming back a little full circle, like what are not necessarily like a charge or a request or a thing, but even like just speaking from your heart, like in this moment, like what are some things that you would love for yourself and maybe your community in terms of what we've been talking about, and like bringing some of like the light and the joy and the passion and the things that we have going on like right now as we move into summertime in the LBC. Oh, sorry, different song. Sorry, every time I say it lately. Summertime. That's right. Sorry. But we're moving in the light. So what do we want to do with it? Like what do we want to do? And it could be rest, because I'm going to do some of that too. But just thinking about that. Mishale, I can see your forehead cooking.
Because it's a six head, really.
It's really great.
She's got a forehead like Tyra. Actually, don't look that song up. It's inappropriate. Okay.
It's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think my hope is for people to believe each other. I just want people to be with each other. And if someone says this is my experience, just believe them and love them and hear them and see them. And if it makes one uncomfortable, like interrogate that, get close to that. Because I think the discomfort of if your experience of racism makes you feel sad, and then I'm responsible for that, right? And I feel guilty, then I'm not going to hear you and see you. I'm going to center that discomfort, right? And so I just instead of trying to be like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. Are you sure? Maybe it was a joke, right? Just believe people and then spend some time with oneself going like, why was that? Oh, because I think underneath that, I would get to, it hurts to see people hurt. I want better for our world. I want us all to feel like we belong and can be authentic. And so sitting in that space of interrogation allows me then to be authentic with my feelings and then dream of a world in which we're all treated with love and dignity and liberation. And my guilt is not helpful, right? But my belief in others' experiences, my love, my compassion, my empathy, that shit's magic, you know? So just that's what I want us to be able to be together, to believe each other, and then in February, right, use that period to both restore and rest, but to reflect, right? And to go, what's going on in my body? Ooh, why am I uncomfortable? Sometimes a lot of times I think there is actual love under that. And I think that love then turns into fear, and then we guard that, right, with defensiveness and guilt and all these other things. And so I think if we could sit with it a little bit differently, then we could actually be in connection, centering love for each other. Like, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't just want everyone to have what they need? You know?
Well,
I know, that 1%, but I think that...
I'm sorry, the cynical, jaded part of me goes
No.
back to, but there is somebody.
There's so many bodies, yeah,
There's so many
absolutely.
bodies. You said
right.
a dollop of hate. There's a little bit more than a dollop,
Yeah,
girl.
I was trying to have the summer vibe.
I
You're right,
know,
though. There is
there.
definitely more than a
Yeah.
dollop.
But
But I was in my dream.
That was.
I was in my dream space.
Yeah,
right?
my dream.
But no,
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think it's about, just taking the time to learn, to educate ourselves, to not. I mean, I don't ever want my clients to be like, you need to educate me because I need to educate myself, but just be open. The other thing is like being open to being checked. Like sometimes like I tell my clients all the time, like if I say something that's offensive or if I miss whatever, misunderstand, misgender, miss whatever, mispronoun, whatever, please let me know because that's the only way that it's about respect. And because like I love my clients, just like you were saying, I respect them first and foremost. I'm all about validation because how many of us were invalidated and then we learned how to do it ourselves. And so I want to be able to validate and teach. That's part of me modeling that helps them learn to validate themselves. So the space needs to be safe. And the authenticity is a big part of what we bring because you clearly, you could be my therapist. I feel the same way that you thought about me. You're authentic at your core, and I think that's a big part of it. And I always bring joy into sessions. We laugh, and I tell them not at your expense, but there's going to be some laughing happen, and sometimes it's because I'm a fool. Because I am
Laughter
that
is so
therapist.
healing, right?
It is.
And I
agree.
actually think when you go into professional spaces and they don't want us to feel joy and laughter, like all of that's connected too, right? Because we
Yes.
connect through joy.
Yes.
And so when
agree.
we gotta make healing joyful, we gotta make, and most low socioeconomic cultures and people, right? That's one of our values. Like we laugh to get through things,
Yeah.
right? That is a coping skill. And so I think that there's like a hierarchy in the way we allow people to heal, which is crap, right? And so it can feel good to laugh and cry and go through that as long as you feel like the person is holding you and not laughing at you, right? Of course.
I'm going to laugh in session.
Isn't
I
it
laugh
Kevin
a lot.
Hart, laugh at my pain or laughed at my pain? Or
Yeah,
something like that.
right? You got a laughing and crying. Very similar.
It's a similar thing to the nervous system.
Very
Yeah.
similar. It's
Very
similar.
cathartic.
Yeah.
Very cathartic. I think like what I hope for this time of year and what we as a community here like have access to is you're talking about believing people, you're talking about validating people, and what I want is what I wish for is more of this, like just coming together and talking to people.
Yeah.
Like just talking. And being I say like lovingly curious. Like I think that the curiosity around who's with me or near me and them seeing me and me seeing them, I'm like very eyeball deep in motherhood right now. And I think that that's the piece, one of the main pieces of like childhood that goes away so fast, is our ability to just show up and be with people. And it's a gift. It's like it's the coolest thing that little kids do it all the time, man. I love it. And I invite, this conversation like came from this idea of like, what do we want people to have some conversations or think about or listen to over the summer that are in our community. And we want to invite you, you know what I mean? Like invite you to our spaces and our communities and our conversations and then find your people. And then maybe also find some people who are not normally your people, because that's a good space to be in too, and see what that's like. But we're getting outside. I will say we're getting outside and we're getting together, and I think that that's fantastic because we've been alone long enough. We were alone for a long time, and getting back into community. And so I just appreciate the two of you being willing to show up when Erica Bosque sends you a text message and is like, hey, do you want to come like talk about a thing recorded with cameras and lights in your face and then be put on social media? And
in 2 hours. No.
I know. I did ask her. I'm like, is it really 2 hours?
And you're going to be great.
And she's like, yeah.
It'll be great.
Like, but I don't have that much to say.
Yes. Yeah. And we do, because we need to talk about it, And so I just think too, talk about circling back to those ancestors, bravery and courage and like risk taking it's in that. Even if you're just going to be in community with people, there's an element of bravery and courage and risk taking, and we need to get back to that. We need to, and that's part of it. And you can't have like compassionate, loving connections without a little bit of risk. And so you two today, showing up in this space like is an example. Right? A very intense example, but an example. And I just want to invite our communities to do that. And I really appreciate the both of you being here and like taking this time. And, I appreciate everybody who listens, and, we're here for you, right? Anybody who is going to be listening to us, like you're in community. So please, stay connected, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, E.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Key to the Bridge, a podcast brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services. I'm your host, Erica Bosque. Key to the Bridge is recorded and produced by Jeff Henderson and Brian Henderson. This is a podcast for everyone.